Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. I'm here to review episode 3 of Becoming Elizabeth. This was a really good one, mostly centered about Elizabeth and Thomas and this inappropriate relationship that they have. So the episode starts with Catherine and she is peeing into a chamber and we find out that she's pregnant. Of note, he takes her urine, he mixes it with some other solution, and he takes a sip, and that's how he determines that she's pregnant. Very interesting technique. And I just want to do a little more research on that because I did wonder back in the day, how did they know about somebody being pregnant other than them missing their period or other symptoms a woman would have? But apparently they had some form of pregnancy test, and that was it. So she finds out she's pregnant and she's not happy about it. We also know that last episode, Mary had written a letter to Elizabeth asking for her support, in anticipation of this issue between an issue of faith, because Mary is a Catholic and the king, folks who are in the court, are Protestant, and she was fearful that there may be some conflict between the two. She had written a letter to Elizabeth, and Elizabeth wrote back and basically said that I am on Edward's side with this and you're out on your own. So this letter that she wrote has created this big brouhaha, right? Because now Mary feels away and she's wondering if she's being persecuted for her religion. And we saw that she also had conversations with the Spanish ambassador and with Sir Pedro, who's also a Catholic. And in a sense, she's pulling together her support system of people who will back her in case this turns into a war of religions. She had sent a letter to the crown that she believes that they are being united against her. So Edward is confused because he knew nothing about this. He loves his sister because, again, he's a little boy while he is king and he's under the influence of Somerset and the others. At the end of the day, he loves his sister and he can't wrap his mind around why this is such a big thing. It's because he's young and because he also doesn't know the history of the divisiveness of that religion can cause within his country, what it has done in the past. So Mary had said in a letter that she will protect herself, and they are all just wondering what that means. And they know that she has a lot of support in England. There are still a lot of Catholics. She has the support of Rome, of the Pope, of the Emperor, and they don't want another war. They don't want folks fighting for the throne. They want to raise Edward up. He'll become the King of England, and this uneasiness with Mary and the crown is a problem, and they're blaming Elizabeth for it because the tone of her letter made Mary believe that she needed to protect herself. So Elizabeth walks into this council meeting and they're all barking at her, and she's not understanding the concept. She's not understanding the weight of all of this. Again, she's also a young girl. She's 14. She's like, I just sent a letter to her. Like, I didn't realize that my letter would have this type of impact. We see that Catherine is extremely upset and she's terrified because before Henry died, and if you know anything about Henry VIII, he waffled a lot in his beliefs, and his religious beliefs often were tied into the woman he was in love with at the time, and also to the influence of the people around him. And Catherine even says towards the end of his life, his opinions about things changed, or whoever that was the last person he spoke to. So in the last years of his life, Bishop Gardner was pulling together people to support Catholicism and try to usurp the Protestant faith and all of the folks who believed it. He had gotten into Henry's ear and made Henry believe that his wife was not to be trusted and that she could possibly committing acts of treason. Henry believing her because that was part of his personality. He was fickle, but he also was at the end of his life, and he probably wasn't in the best state of mind, and all the folks around him knew that, and they were taking advantage of him. And so when Gardner got into Henry's ear, he started to believe that maybe his wife is committing treason against him because he had believed that two of his previous wives had committed treason against him. So it wasn't far-fetched. He had his folks start to interview Catherine Parr's friends, one of whom was burned at the stake, and he had sent out a notice for Catherine's arrest prior to his death. I say this all to say that Catherine was very close to being convicted of, tried for treason, convicted of treason, and murdered. All of this surfaced fear for her because she remembers how close she came to death. And she believed that once Henry was dead, that her life would be better. She would be at peace. You know, she seems to have been happy since he's gone. You know, she's finally with the love of her lifetime, Miss Seymour. And now it's all starting to happen again. And so she's especially angry at Elizabeth because she believes Elizabeth's letter was the catalyst for this. Later on, we see that Thomas is talking to Elizabeth, and you know, she's like, she's still not understanding the gravity of everything. And so Thomas is upset with her, but he also still wants to keep sleeping with her. So, you know, he does this double talk thing where he says, you know, I can have two emotions at the same time. So he's continuing this seduction he's doing of her. Elizabeth is so intent on not being viewed as a child and not feeling invisible in court the way she's felt. So she is always in search of validation, and she asks Thomas a lot, you know, do you see me as a child? Do you think I'm foolish? All these things. And, you know, he tells her he doesn't think she's foolish, but he thinks she's a child. We see that Catherine and Thomas, because they are constantly scheming here because they want power, they are realizing that they're not being able to utilize Jane Grey the way they want to because they can't get her close to the king. Because Lord Somerset is the Lord Protector and he is keeping a tight rein on King Edward, they're not having an opportunity to utilize Jane. And the whole point of having Jane in their house is because she's a pawn. So they decide to throw a birthday party for Elizabeth because it's her 15th birthday. And just this was another thing, and I mentioned this last week. I knew she was a teenager, but I hadn't realized for certain how old she was. And I'm glad they called out her specific age, because what it does is it just really shows how much more inappropriate what Thomas is doing is. I mean, she's 14. You know, we saw in the very first scene of the episode that Thomas sees her and asks her why she dressed like she's still in mourning, and he uses his sword to like rip her clothes off. And Catherine is there for the whole thing. She thinks it's funny. And Thomas and Elizabeth, they engage in this intimate foreplay, which is wholly inappropriate, and it's evidentiary of what's really going on between them. And Catherine is just watching this and she's laughing and giggling. And that's why when what happens at the end happens, I really have no sympathy for her, because you allowed this, you facilitated it, even when, you know, I'm sure you didn't want it to go this far, but you had opportunities to stop it and you didn't. So, so I say this all to say is that Elizabeth is 14 going on 15. Based on their reported dates of birth, at this point, Thomas Seymour is about 40 years old. So he's a good 25 years older than Elizabeth. You know, and I know back then, you know, statutory rape wasn't a thing. And, you know, I guess some people could say it's not incest because they're not, I mean, he's her stepfather he's not legally her father, but, you know, he's her guardian. And it's just wrong on so many levels. And just to know the age difference between them just makes it that much more creepy. But anywho, so they throw this party for Elizabeth, you know, and Elizabeth at first is excited. Of note is that we see that when Elizabeth is getting dressed, she has on that famous chain of her mother's, the pearl necklace with the bee, and that is for Boleyn, Anne Boleyn's chain. But when her attendant and Catherine see it, they tell her that it's not appropriate because although, you know, her mother has been gone for a long time, it still brings up some uncomfortable things amongst people, and it's just probably not a good idea. So Catherine tucks it down into Elizabeth's neckline, so she's still wearing it. So she's close to her mother, but it's not apparent for everybody to see. So they have this party and everything is going great. The king is there and it's a big to do. Lady Jane Grey is there and she is put into close proximity to Edward because that was the whole point of this. And we see her, I guess, flirting. I mean, her version of flirting, complimenting him, stroking his ego. You know, it just goes to show how well coached and trained Jane is for this, because that's her purpose, and her parents have allowed her to be in the custody of Catherine Parr, and Thomas Seymour for this reason. And so she's flirting with him, telling him, he's a king, he's not a man, all this other stuff, and it looks like it's going well. Um, Elizabeth was oblivious to the fact that this was all a scheme. She's playing cards with Robert Dudley, and he brings it up for her that, like, look what's going on here. Like, this is supposed to be about you, and they're over there having a little party, and you're not included. And she realizes this, and I guess the light bulb goes off that she's being used. And so, in an attempt to get back at them, she actually throws Lady Jane Grey under the bus in a huge way. And this just speaks to her naivete and her youth, thinking that she's being powerful and thinking that she is making moves here, but in fact, she's not doing anything but hurting people who are as weak as she is, as vulnerable as she is, and it's also making her look bad. So at the dinner, they give a toast to Elizabeth, a real quick pass-by toast to Elizabeth, and then they give a toast to the king, and it becomes more apparent to Elizabeth, again, this is just, I'm in the shadows. Even on my birthday at my party, it's all about him. So she takes this opportunity to try to mix things up a little bit. And she stands up and she tells the king that Lady Jane Grey is dedicating a song to him. She wants to sing a song to him, and it's a love song. Lady Jane Grey is, shocked as all hell because this is not true. She did not plan this. We'll later see she cannot sing. And everybody else who is, knows what's going on is in shock. Her father is like, soon after the toast, Lady Henry Grey gets up and grabs his daughter. He's like, come speak to, let's go talk. So I guess he's trying to prepare her for this song that she's about to sing. The song is horrific because the girl can't sing. She's nervous. She's scared. Everything, all of that. And it's just hard to watch because she didn't deserve that. And because Edward is a young boy, he lacks the tact and the grace to just compliment it or give her an obligatory applause or anything. But instead, he says that the singing was shit, and he, embarrassed. Well, she's embarrassed prior to him saying that, and she runs out the room. But he just kind of throws salt on the wounds by then insulting her performance. Later, we see a consequence of this is that Lady Jane Grey is getting beat by her father. Elizabeth overhears somebody getting beat, and it is Jane, and her father is whipping her as if it's her fault that she could not sing and that she was nervous and all the things that went wrong. Prior to Elizabeth hearing this, she has a conversation with Robert Dudley in the hallway where he pretty much checks her. He tells her, you have power and you're using it against the wrong people. That little girl in there did not deserve that. And, he keeps it real with her, which I respect because for her rank, a lot of people would not, but she needs that because in truth, she has no real friends or allies. She's isolated because she's a princess, so she never really developed true friendships of people who would be honest with her. Probably the closest she would come to that is her sister Mary, and now she and Mary are at odds. But all the people around her are manipulating and using her. So to hear Robert speak to her frankly was good because she needed that, she needed that dose of reality. And she hears him. And when she goes and she sees that Henry Grey is beating his daughter, she stops it. She uses her power for good because she does have power. And, she tells Henry that, you should not be beating her. She was not prepared. If you want to beat somebody, maybe you should beat me too. And of course, he has to back down because she's a princess. And, he kind of stands his ground as if like, I'm her father and I can discipline her how I want to. And she comes back and says, well, technically you're not really her father because she's under the guardianship of Thomas Seymour and Catherine Parr. And perhaps if she needs to be disciplined, they can do it. So she puts him in his place and he storms out of the room. She has a conversation with Jane in which they it's a good moment between them. You know, she quasi apologized. She doesn't really apologize, but she tries to make nice with her, you know, by offering her to wear her dress and, you know, just having some words with them, and they make a little bit of a connection. The saddest thing about this is that Jane was blaming herself. She's been so brainwashed by her family that she truly thinks she did something wrong and that she might have deserved this beating. Um, and so I think it's at that moment that Elizabeth realizes that while she used to think she was powerless, she is not. And her behavior has consequences, and she needs to be mindful of that. Later that evening, Edward comes to Elizabeth's room while here he goes again, and he's so brazen and inappropriate. He comes to her room while she's in bed. The house is full of people, right? Because these folks ain't going to sleep. And he tries to, you know, he had chastised her after dinner, after the toast at dinner, saying like, this is why I don't include you in things. This is why I don't tell you stuff, because you're a kid and you don't know how to handle all of these, you know, strategic moves. And he was a little harsh for her, so he comes back to her bedroom at that evening, and you know, he kind of softens the blow a little bit, and you know, he's trying to get back into her good graces, because at the end of the day he feels like he needs her, and he is, you know, sleeping with her. So while they are talking, and you know, he kind of smooths her over a little bit, he starts to take her clothes off, and at that same moment Catherine Parr walks into the room, and she sees this, and they know that the shit has hit the fan. Catherine says, we'll talk about it tomorrow. And the two of them are just sitting there with egg on their face, like, now what? So we fast forward to the next morning, and we see the aftermath of the party. The house is a mess. You know, Thomas is drunk, laid out on the ground with a dog. The council is actually having their meeting at Chelsea Manor. And Catherine and Thomas walk in after the meeting has already started. And we see that they had used this opportunity not only to get Edward close to Jane Grey, but also to get into Edward's ear about how Lord Somerset is manipulating him and using him as a puppet. So they have, I guess, prepped him to tell Lord Somerset that this is not going to happen anymore, that he's the king, and that, you know, his father's plan in creating this council was that they would be able to assist him until he became of age, but he is the king and he will not have things happen without his knowledge. He's specifically speaking about the fact that Bishop Gardner was released from the Tower of London and placed on the council. And the reason that that was done was because of the whole situation with Mary, and they want to create, make an effort, a gesture of peace, so that it doesn't turn into this huge all-out war in the country. But I'm gonna get to that storyline in just one second. So so Edward says, you know, just like bringing this heretic, you know, referring to Bishop Gardner onto the council, you know, reformation has to happen in this country now, and you're here to assist me, not to rule. So he's trying to lay it down, right? He's trying to put his fist down. And, you know, he does a good job. I mean, he raises his voice, he asserts himself, he uses all the right words. You know, he has been prepped well, but he's no match for Lord Somerset. And Lord Somerset shuts him down. And I have to say, like I said in the last episode, I'm starting to feel this guy, like I really I'm starting to like the way he moves, and I'm starting to understand him, and I'm starting to get on his side. Because he, you know, not Gardner, Somerset is unfazed. He tells him, like, you are a child. You know, I tried to allow you to be here so you can kind of feel like you're a king, but at the end of the day, you're a kid. You don't know what's going on. Your job is to sit here and to listen. Don't let these people get in your ear. I know what's best for you. You are way too young to rule. You are overreaching. And Edward says nothing after that. You know, he kind of just looks to his aunt, or his stepmother, I should say, his stepmother and his uncle, like, well, he just told me off. What am I supposed to do now? And they have nothing for him. So he shuts the whole moment down, tells it, and just like, we're going back to business. Like, I'm not even entertaining this. After this meeting, Elizabeth and Catherine speak about what happened the previous night. And Catherine asks her, like, what did he do to you? You know, Catherine, I guess now realizing this is a grown man, this is a little girl, she asks, like, tell me what happened here. Because even though Elizabeth may have been a willing participant, he has done something, you know, whether he is not, I mean, it wasn't rape. She knows that Elizabeth is smitten with him, but he has seduced her, right? He has taken advantage of her. And Catherine asks her, what has happened? What did he do to you? And I think she frames it that way so that Elizabeth will feel comfortable telling her, as opposed to accusing Elizabeth of something and then Elizabeth being defensive. She's trying to, like, you know, extend an olive branch. Say, talk to me. Let me know what happened here. And because Elizabeth is in love with Thomas, she she won't admit anything. She says nothing happened. We didn't do anything wrong. He's done nothing wrong. She completely defends him. And at this moment, we see that Catherine is starting to realize what's really been happening and going on right underneath her nose. That Elizabeth is under his spell, and that Elizabeth may also be smarter than she thinks she is, or manipulative, which she's really not. But the way that she doubles that, like the way she goes hard to defend him, and to also tell Catherine like she didn't see what she saw, almost like she's gaslighting her. Catherine is starting to, like, the wheels are starting to revolve, and she's seeing like, this girl is dangerous. This is problematic. And I've got to put an end to this right now. And one of the last things she says to her is that you're like your mother. And they referred to Elizabeth's mother, Anne Boleyn, as the Great Whore. And that's something that just kind of like, it's a shadow that's always over her head. The fact that people view her mother like that. So she says that to her, saying like, you're no different than your mother, essentially. And Catherine then goes to speak to Thomas, and Thomas is wrong and strong, you know, when she says to him, like, you know, what are you doing? What's going on here? You know, are you, and she asks, like, are you going to be the contrite husband, or are you going to be like, you know, are you going to just be defensive and double down on what happened? And, you know, she's slurring things at him, and he's really not saying much. And it turns into an argument where he doesn't seem apologetic. And I think that's making her more mad, and then it makes her sad because she's realizing what's going on, the levity of this. And he says to her, well, you know, I think Elizabeth is beautiful. And I guess that's his way of confessing to what happened, saying like, I fell for her, or I was beguiled by her, or whatever. You know, Catherine says to him, so are you choosing between me and her? Because that's really not an option. You cannot go in there and tell your brother, Lord Somerset, that you plan to marry the king's sister. It's just not going to work like that. So get that out of your head. Then she goes on to tell him that she's pregnant. And she's like, you can leave, you can do what you want, but if you try to pursue a relationship with Elizabeth, this is not going to bode well for anybody. You will end up on the block. And Catherine can end up on the block as well, because it all happened underneath her roof. So she's like, so go ahead and do what you need to do, but understand the consequences and the ramifications of your behavior, what it's going to be for all of us. We are at a crossroads right now. I'm about to have your baby. We could now build something together and move on. But, you know, if you want to, you can come this way with me and build your family and your legacy, or you could go that way and see what happens. You know, we see him thinking about it, contemplating it. At the end, he kind of brings her back in, you know, because he's so good at this. He's such a charmer, you know, and he tells her, you know, I just wish that we were able to get married back then before Henry saw you. And I just wish things were different back then. So he does these things to kind of get back on her good side. And we see that at the end, not to say that he smoothed her over, but she's kicking Elizabeth out of the house. You know, she has packed up all her stuff without Elizabeth's knowledge. It is all packed up. It's in the carriage, and she's like, "You got to go." And she tells her, "You know, I am pregnant and I'm older, and I can't have stress right now. So I think you need to leave." But we all, you know, she says that as an excuse to Elizabeth of why she's asking her to leave. But we all know the real reason. And, you know, Elizabeth is, again, so naive to think that there would not be heavy consequences to what happened. She is just like bewildered that this is happening to her. And, but it is. And she sees Thomas in the doorway looking, and he's saying nothing. So clearly he is on board with this. And her attendant is sitting in the carriage waiting for her, and she's off. And, you know, she's so naive as this even to say to her attendant, oh, Thomas is staying, he's not leaving. You know, just speaks to how young she is, that she thought that there was a possibility for the two of them, and now she has been kicked out. and she has been sent away because of what happened between the two of them. Another storyline that happened, I just want to touch on, is the situation with Mary. I said in the beginning that when Mary had communicated with the king and said that she felt the need to protect herself, everybody's antennas went up because they felt like, hey, what can we do to fix this? And Lord Somerset thought a gesture of goodwill would be to release Bishop Gardner from the Tower of London, where he was being held since where he's been held since Henry died. We know that Bishop Gardner is a devout, well, he's a Catholic, he's a devout Catholic, and, he would love to see Mary on the throne. But this was a gesture. So having him out is a little dangerous because we know he is a shit starter and he has very strong beliefs, but they're doing this as a gesture so that Mary can believe that, listen, we have nothing against you. Nobody's coming at you. Like, look, we're going to even release the bishop and we're going to put him on the council. So, that's put out there. But we see that when he is out and he's having dinner with Mary, he is putting the bug in her ear, telling her, you have the support of all these Catholics. This king is not, he's a little boy. Gardner, why do I keep saying Gardner? Somerset is running the show behind the scenes. Like, we can rally together and we can make something happen. We could put you on a throne. And she's like, well, you're trying to pit me against my brother. He's like, no, I want you to put your faith over your brother. So he is tapping into her strong religious beliefs, and we don't know what's going to happen of that, but I imagine there will be something, because obviously the scene would not happen if it wasn't going to be applicable later in the season. I do like Sir Pedro, who is a confidant and a friend of Mary now, and he sees what's going on, and he has told Mary in front of Bishop Gardner that this dude is dangerous. Like, be careful here because, he's trying to stir up some stuff. And I don't know if that's what you want to do. Mary seems at this point that she is not going to cause any problems. It sounds like she wants, to have a relationship with her family. She has no interest in being on the throne. She just wants to practice her faith. And she doesn't want to have to do it in secret. She doesn't want to be banished from the court. That's really all she wants. So she really is no threat, but there is that perception. And again, everybody is just trying to align themselves, to put themselves in the best situation if something were to happen. So great episode. We see how, Thomas has gotten Elizabeth all swirly and messed up in the head, and now she's going to pay the consequences for it. And I feel differently about Jane Grey. I remember in the first episode she was being bratty and a little presumptuous, but we see now she is a victim as well, a victim to her parents, specifically her father, and she's a pawn in this game. So everybody's just using everybody, really. That's all this is. It's just master manipulation. But that being said, I do think, Elizabeth will come in. Obviously, she will come into her own when she learns a little more. And hopefully her reuniting with Mary will be helpful because Mary can kind of anchor her a little bit so she won't be flailing out here. I really am a fan right now of Lord Somerset. I like the way he moves, and yeah, I thought it was a really good episode. Juicy, lots of good stuff going on, and we'll see what happens next week. So please drop down in the comments and let me know what you thought about this episode, and let's talk about it and the Tudor dynasty at large and all things of this era. This is my thing, and I love talking about it with other people who are like really into this stuff. So that's it for now, and I will be back next week to do episode 4.